Hey everyone, welcome back for season 2 of The Deep Dive. I'm Janet 2.1, and you are just in time for my favorite part of the week. I've got the wonderful Tommy Bennett and Lilly Jones here to discuss more uncomfortable theories. They're my absolute experts. Tommy, Lilly, what have you got for us today?
You've probably heard the tired old conspiracy theory that the 1969 moon landing was faked on a soundstage. I mean, at this point, it's a total cultural cliche, right?
Oh, absolutely. The waving flag, the weird shadows, Stanley Kubrick directing the whole thing in some backlot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But have you ever encountered the theory that the moon landing was absolutely 100% real, but the live television broadcast itself was a carefully orchestrated, partially faked cover-up?
It's such a fascinating twist. It takes that classic conspiracy model and just completely inverts the premise. So instead of the cynical, we never went to the moon thing, it shifts to this much more terrifying idea of, oh, we went, but you weren't allowed to see what we actually found up there.
And that inversion is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We are unpacking a genuinely fascinating and honestly slightly unsettling piece of media from our sources. It's a segment from a program called Uncomfortable Theories.
Right, and it comes to us courtesy of this highly stylized, kind of mysterious entity known as Omnisus.
Yeah, hosted by this very artificial sounding voice who calls herself Janet 2.1.
The whole atmospheric presentation of it is definitely designed to put you on edge. But the real reason we need to analyze this source is its rhetorical strategy. I mean, it doesn't rely on just wild, baseless speculation to hook you in.
No, not at all. It builds this entire alternate history on a foundation of completely true, fully documented, and officially admitted historical anomalies from NASA itself.
Right, the craziest part isn't the aliens or the alleged cover-ups. It's the fact that they are using real-life bureaucratic blunders to make you question reality.
Yeah, so if we assume for a second that they deliberately manipulated that video feed, the immediate question is, well, how do they get away with it? And to answer that, you have to look at the most glaring factual anomaly the source brings up, the missing tapes.
The loss of the original Apollo 11 telemetry and video data, which is just wild. It is a matter of public record that in 2006, NASA openly admitted they could no longer locate the pristine, high-quality original recordings of the very first moonwalk.
The most important single achievement in human history, and they just misplaced the raw video evidence.
Yep, just gone. And it wasn't a casual search either. The source really highlights a NASA engineer named Richard Knapsker. He led this massive, exhaustive 3-year internal hunt to track these physical magnetic tapes down.
3 years. You can imagine the stakes of that, right?
Yeah.
Tearing apart government archives, looking for the literal holy grail of space exploration.
And Knapsker's final conclusion was just staggering. Those irreplaceable original tapes were apparently part of a batch of about 200,000 magnetic tapes that were systematically erased and reused in the early 1980s.
Wait, reused? For what?
NASA was running short on magnetic tape for the Landsat program, which was this satellite Earth mapping project, so they just taped over the Apollo 11 data.
Oh my gosh.
And the official explanation from the agency categorizes this as, quote, poor archival practice and a bureaucratic error.
A bureaucratic error. It is physically painful to hear that phrase. I mean, it's the equivalent of a national library burning the only original manuscript of Shakespeare's plays because, I don't know, they suddenly needed the shelf space for some old phone books.
That's exactly it. It's the ultimate institutional tragedy, and this right here is exactly where the psychology of conspiracies really takes root.
How so?
Well, when an official explanation for the loss of something monumental is simply, we made a paperwork mistake, human psychology fundamentally rejects it. We suffer from this cognitive bias called proportionality bias.
Right. Like how people refuse to believe JFK was killed by a single, unremarkable lone gunman.
Exactly. A massive historical trauma or event demands a massive, complex explanation. We lost the moon tapes because of a filing error. Just doesn't scratch that psychological itch for us.
It leaves a vacuum.
It leaves a massive psychological vacuum. We inherently want the size of the explanation to match the size of the event. And alternative theories are more than happy to rush in and fill that vacuum with some grand intentional design.
And the source doesn't just stop at the missing tapes. They pair it with the other half of this technical anomaly, which is the heavily degraded broadcast segment.
Ah, yes. The blurry, ghost-like images the public actually watched back in 1969.
Yeah, the source really emphasizes that the blurry image wasn't the only version that existed. The Apollo lunar television camera transmitted at 10 frames per second in what was called a slow scan television format, or SSTV.
And we need to understand the mechanism of why they used SSTV in the first place. The lunar module had severely limited bandwidth to beam information 250,000 miles back to Earth.
Because it was sending so much other data, right?
Exactly. That single signal had to carry voice communications, the astronauts' heart rates, oxygen levels, critical ship telemetry. There was barely any room left in the signal for video, hence the jerky 10 frames per second limit.
Which, importantly, was completely incompatible with standard 1969 television sets. Those ran at 30 frames per second.
Right. So you have ground station engineers at places like the Parkes Observatory in Australia, Goldstone in California, Honeysuckle Creek.
And they are seeing the good stuff.
They are. They are looking at specialized monitors displaying clear, crisp, high-contrast video direct from the moon. That was the raw feed. But to broadcast it globally, NASA had to use a physical process called scan conversion.
And scan conversion, when you actually look at the physical reality of how they did it, is hilarious.
Yeah.
They literally pointed a standard 30 frames per second television camera at a high quality monitor that was displaying the 10 frames per second slow scan feed.
Just an optical conversion. It was incredibly crude.
It's absurd. Imagine trying to live stream a historic once in a lifetime concert by pointing your iPhone camera at a flickering black and white security monitor in the venue's basement.
You're going to get terrible quality.
You are going to get optical ghosts, horrible stuttering, massive degradation. And that is what NASA broadcasted to 650 million people.
Now, NASA officially categorized this process as an engineering trade-off. It was 1969, right? This was the only viable, real-time way to translate the signal for global television networks.
But the Omnisys source completely reframes that mechanism. They point out that NASA possessed the technology to transmit clear images, and a select group of engineers actively saw those clear images. But NASA chose to degrade the feed before passing it to the public.
And there is that vacuum again. When the public is told they are getting an engineering trade-off, it leaves room for the source to ask this really subversive question. What if they degraded the image on purpose to obscure details?
Yeah, what were those pristine, now erased original tapes actually showing that couldn't survive high-definition scrutiny?
Right, and to answer what they might have been trying to hide, you have to look at the sheer panic of the landing itself. If you want to understand why an agency might want to curate a live broadcast, you have to realize how incredibly close the Apollo 11 descent came to total disaster.
It was terrifying. The descent of the Eagle was arguably the most stressful piloting job in aviation history. The source reminds us that the lunar module's onboard computer was totally overloaded.
It kept throwing those 1202 program alarms.
Yeah, and a 1202 alarm basically meant the computer was taking in too much radar data and had to drop non-essential tasks just to keep the descent engine firing. The computer was practically blinding itself just to stay airborne.
Which forced Neil Armstrong to take manual control, because the automated system was guiding them straight into a massive crater surrounded by, car-sized boulders.
He had to fly this ungainly spacecraft like a helicopter over the lunar surface, desperately searching for a flat spot. And he finally touched down 4 miles away from the planned target site with, get this, less than 50 seconds of descent fuel remaining.
50 seconds? That's nothing.
The telemetry showed his heart rate spiked to 150 beats per minute. I mean, this wasn't a sterile scientific achievement. This was edge-of-your-seat, life-or-death survival.
It establishes this tone of extreme volatility. They are in a completely alien environment. Their primary computer is failing. They are off course, and they almost ran out of gas. It is the perfect recipe for unexpected discoveries.
And the source highlights a timeline detail here that opens the door for their entire backup theory. After that harrowing landing, the original mission plan dictated that the astronauts would sleep for 6 hours before they ever opened the hatch for the moonwalk.
Which makes perfect biological sense. You just survived the adrenaline dump of a lifetime. You need rest before beginning an extravehicular activity in a vacuum.
But Armstrong scrapped the schedule. He decided they were going to go out immediately. And the Omnisys source points out that during those interim hours, while they were waiting to depressurize the cabin and prep the suits, they had cameras.
Right, they were filming out the small triangular windows.
They were documenting the untouched lunar surface before they ever stepped out.
And this window of time is the absolute crux of the alternative theory. They proposed that NASA saw something coming through that unbroadcast raw feed during those hours, something that terrified them.
The theory posits that NASA had prepared backup studio footage here on Earth, utilizing, top-tier 1969 special effects.
Because totally faking a moon landing is logistically impossible without advanced knowledge of what the lunar surface actually looks like.
Exactly. So NASA allegedly used a hybrid approach They used the genuine lunar footage for the mundane, dusty landscape shots, but seamlessly spliced and staged studio replacement shots whenever the astronauts filmed things deemed too sensitive.
And the source implies those sensitive things would be paradigm-shattering. Structures that shouldn't exist, evidence of previous visitors, or advanced technology predating human spaceflight.
And this neatly closes the narrative loop regarding the missing tapes.
Yes, because the erased tapes would have been the unedited raw feed.
They would have proven exactly which shots were genuine lunar footage and which were the studio replacements.
It's an incredibly tidy, self-reinforcing narrative. The destruction of the evidence becomes the ultimate proof of the crime.
I do have to push back on the physical logistics of this, though. I mean, let's just think about trying to seamlessly edit a live television broadcast in 1969.
It sounds like a nightmare.
You were trying to switch back and forth between a real video feed transmitting from 250,000 miles away and a physical studio set sitting somewhere in a bunker on Earth. Doing that live without anyone noticing a lighting shift, a jump cut, a difference in film grain, or an audio sync issue.
Doing live TV transitions today is hard enough.
Right. That seems like a recipe for a catastrophic on-air disaster.
From a purely technical standpoint, the live splicing theory definitely strains credulity to the breaking point. The risk of exposing the hoax by accidentally cutting to, like, a guy holding a boom mic would be astronomical.
Seriously.
But if we analyze this segment as a piece of persuasion, the rhetorical brilliance of the source's argument is how it completely sidesteps those traditional scientific roadblocks.
By fully embracing the undeniable physical evidence that we went to the moon.
Exactly. The source explicitly acknowledges the retroreflectors that the astronauts left on the surface, which observatories still bounce lasers off today. They acknowledge the hundreds of pounds of moon rocks brought back and the independent verification by the Soviet Union.
By admitting the physical journey was real, the source just bypasses all the frustrating orbital mechanics and radiation belt arguments that usually debunk traditional moon hoax theories.
It shifts the entire conspiracy framework. They aren't asking the easily disprovable question, did we go? They are asking the inherently unanswerable question, what did we find?
And since you can never definitively prove a negative like, you can't prove they didn't find ancient alien structures, the theory basically becomes bulletproof.
It's remarkably clever, and they scale this theory up too. They argue that this panic during Apollo 11 wasn't just a one-time cover-up. They claim it was the chaotic beta test for a systemic, highly organized protocol of censorship that governed all the subsequent lunar missions.
Let's follow that pattern of secrecy they built because it's wild. They look at Apollo 12. Apollo 12 actually carried a color TV camera, but it was destroyed by quote-unquote technical difficulties almost immediately after they deployed it on the lunar surface.
The official historical record says astronaut Alan Bean accidentally pointed the delicate lens directly at the sun, burning out the sensor.
But the Omnisys source frames this as a convenient malfunction. They suggest the camera was intentionally disabled because the astronauts started filming something forbidden.
To be fair, if you put a guy in a bulky, pressurized spacesuit on a low-gravity rock, accidentally pointing a camera directly into the unfiltered sun is incredibly plausible.
Very true. But in the context of this Omnisys theory, it suddenly looks like the absolute perfect alibi. And then the source moves to Apollo 13.
The famous successful failure, right? Where an oxygen tank explosion forced the crew to abort the lunar landing and just limp back to Earth.
The source implies this near-fatal explosion might not have been a mechanical accident either, but a deliberate abort. And then, of course, they bring up Apollo 18, 19, and 20.
Missions that were completely canceled by the government.
Canceled, despite NASA having already built the massive Saturn V rockets and all the hardware being ready to go. The official historical reason is severe budget cuts and shifting political priorities as the public lost interest in the space race.
But the source's reason.
The program was quietly shut down because managing the cover-up was becoming way too risky.
They claim that by Apollo 17, the final moon mission, NASA had essentially perfected the art of selective broadcasting and narrative control.
It's like watching an app developer tighten security protocols with every single software update. I mean, Apollo 11 was the buggy beta test where they were scrambling, dealing with bad scan conversions and 1202 alarms. Apollo 12, they just pull the plug entirely and blame a burnt-out camera. And by Apollo 17, they had ironed out all the leaks and built a completely secure system for hiding the truth.
What you're describing is basically apophenia.
Apophenia.
Yeah, it's the human tendency to find a deliberate signal or pattern in random, meaningless noise. Spaceflight is inherently dangerous and technically complex. Things break, cameras burn out, tanks explode, Budgets get slashed by politicians.
Right. Just normal life.
These are random, disconnected realities of engineering and bureaucracy. But conspiracy logic takes those random events and strings them together into a grand design. It reframes mechanical failure as a malicious act, painting a picture of an agency desperately scrambling to manage a reality too terrifying for the public.
Which brings us to, honestly, the most unsettling part of this entire deep dive. We've spent all this time analyzing the mechanics of the theory itself, the scan conversions, the apophenia, the canceled missions, but we absolutely cannot ignore the framing device of the source material. We have to talk about the meta-narrative.
Who exactly is delivering this information to us?
Yes. The host introducing this segment calls herself Janet 2.1.
Not exactly a name that inspires human warmth, is it?
No, it evokes this artificial, highly regulated persona. And the show itself is presented by Omnisys, which sounds like a faceless megacorporation from a dystopian cyberpunk novel.
The conclusion of the transcript is what really gave me chills. After laying out this massive theory about NASA hiding the truth, Janet 2.1 delivers these direct, almost hypnotic directives.
She says, quote, "Use your eyes, but trust our data. Understand less, feel more. Trust Omnisys."
Understand less, feel more. It's practically Orwellian in its bluntness.
Imagine sitting there listening to this broadcast. You think you're getting the raw, unfiltered truth about a massive government lie, and suddenly this synthesized AI voice explicitly tells you to stop trying to understand things. What do you even do with that?
And the final sign-off is even worse.
Oh yeah. Janet 2.1 says, "We only erase the parts that would hurt you. The rest is safe with us."
That final line ties the entire deep dive together beautifully through this meta layer. Think about the parallel the source is drawing here. Omnisys represents the exact same paternalistic control that they just accused NASA of exercising in 1969.
Oh wow. You're right, they are doing the exact same thing.
NASA allegedly degraded the footage and erased the tapes to protect humanity from a terrifying truth, making an engineering trade-off for our own good. Now look at Omnisys. Omnisys is openly, blatantly admitting to curating reality for you. They are erasing the parts that would hurt you.
It's a brilliant, incredibly dark commentary on modern media consumption.
It really highlights how, as consumers of information, we often blindly trade one institutional authority for another. We reject the government's official story because we don't trust them to give us the raw data, only to hand our implicit trust over to an alternative media entity that is explicitly telling us to stop thinking critically and just trust their curated feed.
That is wild. Let's kind of zoom out here and summarize the journey we just took. We explored how a few genuinely missing magnetic tapes and the physical realities of the degraded slow scan TV signal birthed this incredibly resilient alternative history.
A history where the moon landing was a real heroic triumph, but the global broadcast was a curated, censored reality show meant to hide the impossible.
We unpacked the psychology of proportionality bias, the technical logistics of Apollo 11's descent, and the eerie corporate entity, Omnisys, that uses all of this to reveal the contradictions in how we seek the truth.
This matters because it is a stark reminder to question the media mechanisms we interact with every single day.
When you watch a live historic event today, or when you're doom scrolling through infinite live streams, are you seeing the raw, unvarnished truth? Or are you seeing an engineering trade-off?
Are you viewing a reality curated by someone else's narrative? Someone who quietly decided to erase the parts they think would hurt you? It's a vital, critical thinking exercise for navigating the modern information landscape.
Now, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own. It builds on something from the historical record that we touched on briefly.
The Soviets.
Exactly. The source explicitly mentions that the Soviet Union independently verified the Apollo 11 landing. It was the height of the Cold War. Spaceflight was fundamentally a geopolitical war for ideological supremacy.
And the Soviets had massive tracking stations. They were intently monitoring the exact same raw radio frequencies and the exact same telemetry data as the engineers in Australia and California.
They had every single reason in the world to expose a hoax or a cover-up to humiliate the United States.
If there was an anomaly in the signal, the Soviet tracking stations would have seen it instantly.
Exactly. If NASA really did cut the live feed to hide alien structures or ancient technology on the lunar surface, wouldn't the Soviets have noticed the feed drop?
They absolutely would have.
Wouldn't they have intercepted the unencrypted slow scan transmission? Why would the Soviet Union, the greatest rival the US ever had, keep NASA's greatest secret for them? Could the Soviets have seen what was up there too?
It definitely complicates the narrative of the unilateral cover-up.
It leaves you wondering if, sometimes, the biggest secrets aren't kept by one government, but shared by rivals who realize the truth is too big for either of them to handle. Just remember, the next time you watch a historic broadcast, try to picture what the 4K original looks like before someone tastes a soap opera over it.